And it's the context of the difference between linear versus leveraged. So linear, and this is in the context of money. So linear income is where you make money by the hour. You might make it based on a salary. You might make it for doing a job, right? Like my house cleaner gets paid the same amount regardless of how long it takes her. Or you might find yourself in a situation where you make it by commission, like you do in real estate. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with linear income, with the exception of when you stop putting your time to drive that income. How much income do you have?
Nothing.
You have none, right? So the majority of the world lives in this state, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with living in that state, except for there is no freedom that really exists over here. You can have flexibility as an entrepreneur in the real estate industry. However, you do not have freedom if you're transaction to transaction to transaction to transaction. And I always like to put it in this context of that anything that you have to think about all the time is like any other addiction. So if you're in this situation, you're actually in an addictive state. If you've got to think about when your next closing is and what your budget is for the month and how much XYZ you've got to go do to generate that business to support your life, it is like any other addiction. Because it consumes your time, your energy, and your focus. And unfortunately, this is the way that the majority of people live, particularly ones that aren't consistent and focused and disciplined in what it takes to really succeed at a high level as a realtor in the industry. So I'm talking realtors because this is the audience, that we're at today. However, this is true for many, many people in their lives because they're in the situation of not having leverage. Now, most people don't, they don't know. Like, I didn't know that. That's where I was at until I was losing everything, right? So it's the end of 2008, and I have $10,000 a month in fixed expenses to make sure that I can pay my bills. I'm selling real estate full-time as an agent. I'm doing real estate 50 to 60 hours a week at that point, and I had been one of those people that purchased my home for 0% down. I would put the highest offer in to get all the other offers off the table, and then when it didn't appraise, we negotiated it back down to whatever it would appraise for, which was still too much at that time, and then I got my loan based on that, which is like fantastic, except for that it was a adjustable rate mortgage, and it had a lifespan to it, and I was like, this is no problem because I'm going to sell enough real estate that then when it comes time to refi, this is like going to not be a big deal. So end of 2008, here's where it actually sits. I had over $80,000 in credit card debt, and my mortgage was over $6,000 a month. And to refi that credit card debt down, I borrowed 60 grand from my mom and dad to pay down the credit cards to get my mortgage to where it was going to be $5,000 a month because I was loved the home that I was in. I did not want to leave it, right? That still left me with some credit card debt at that time. However, ultimately I lost everything because I just couldn't keep it up, right? And I will never forget the month that I was introduced to the concept of leverage because I was sitting on the floor in my then living room, and I had 6 deals that were supposed to close between November and December of 2007, and one by one, it was like $125,000 in commission. I'm like, this is like no problem. I'm working my butt off. Like I've had to run up the credit cards again. It's all gonna work out fine, and one by one, for whatever reason, each one of those deals fell apart. So I literally, at that point in time, was like, how am I gonna keep my lights on? What am I going to do in my life? So the idea of being an entrepreneur, the idea of being a realtor, and everything that goes with it, be clear about this. You have a business where you have flexibility, and you're in a linear income vehicle. So why I am really focusing in on this kind of tough conversation is because you just got to know the game that you're in, so you know how to navigate your life based on what that game is, right? Now, the value of having leverage is an entirely different conversation, because the time for money conversation goes away. And when you're out seeing, whatever people are posting on Facebook, and if you're running into any stigma regarding EXP, it's because people don't understand this, because nobody's taken the time to have a conversation with them about this. So if you'd like to challenge this, by a show of hands, how many of you have ever been to a retirement party for a realtor? One person. Most realtors work until they die. That is the truth, right? Because they haven't set themselves up, and it is a very small percentage of people that can ever stop doing that. So when you start to really understand, okay, this is the point A of where everyone sits in their life, you now have something in your hands that you can make a dramatic difference for if you know how to have a conversation with somebody, not about EXP, about their life, like real talk about life, where you connect with people. Because would you agree that if you look back at the decisions that you've made, that you've taken action on in your life, you had some kind of emotional connection to it that drove you to take a different action? Would everyone agree with that?
Yep.
So how do you get to the emotion of what's real? This is the conversation I like to have with people. What is your plan? What are you gonna do? And what you'll discover if you have that question is, or if you take the time to ask that question, is most people don't have a plan. They just hope that they can dodge this and hope that this continues to work out okay, right? So I love recruiting. I have been doing it for 12 years because I very clearly understood the pain of what this is like when it doesn't go so well, right? And not because I wasn't working and not because I wasn't willing to do the work, I was working my brains out, right? So, any questions so far just on the concepts that we've covered around being a linear income versus a leverage and the value? No? Okay. So now let's talk about something that gets a lot more exciting, which is the power of that. And I'm sure you guys have all seen something like this at some point, somewhere along the way. However, this would be a monthly income based on what EXP offers, to the equivalent of having this much cash in the bank earning 5% interest. Okay? So when you go, well, if I'm a realtor selling real estate, let's talk about why EXP has the model that it has. Well, as you guys go out into the market and you go to listing appointments and you're in a listing appointment, and maybe there's 4 other agents that are also interviewing, or that are being interviewed to take that listing, you are in competition with people in the market to get that listing, right? So whoever gets the listing controls the market, because the number of listings that you have dictate the amount of buyer transactions that you're able to do on the other side. And so when you think about somebody that is not with EXP, they go into the market and they're in this situation where they're in competition with the other agents. And there's going to be one commission that gets paid, and that commission is going to get paid to the agent that is the person that's persuasive enough to capture that listing and secure the deal all the way through closing. What EXP has done is so brilliant, because now it takes those same pool of agents and it says, well, if you guys want to work together and collaborate together, when you go out and are up against 3 other people or 4 other people that are taking a listing, if those agents are agents that you have attracted that are working together with EXP, yes, they're going to get their commission. However, EXP is going to offer something called revenue share for that collaboration of you working together. And so it becomes a win-win in a competition space that completely changes the game, where it's not you against whoever else is going up for that client. It is you with that person, because at the end of the day now there is an incentive to be working together and to be collaborating. You don't have to worry about that. EXP pays that out in the form of rev share. And so when you start to look at, well, what are some of the things that you could have a conversation about? or questions that you could ask someone about what their plan is, and this gets into the word tracking thing, it is, if it was possible for you to work cap-free every year and have retirement benefits built in multiple different ways, is that a conversation that you'd be open to looking at? Like, I don't like the EXP brand out there in a Facebook platform, personally, from an agent attraction perspective, right? Because for exactly what you said, if you run into someone and they know that you're with EXP, now it's like they're just thinking, okay, well, this conversation is going to be about how they get me in their business, right? Or how they get me to join their company. And so you remove the relationship element of actually connecting with people, because it's not about EXP, it's about being able to have a conversation with somebody that links them to what can happen or be better in their life. They don't know what they don't know, right? And nobody likes to be sold or pushed. So in that conversation, as you start to look at, okay, well, what that could mean for the person that's in a linear situation, which is most realtors, and the numbers that we just said is that the majority of people that live in the United States don't have $50,000. It's less than $50,000 saved in retirement, which is right here. What that means is that an extra $200 a month would make a huge difference for somebody that hasn't set themselves up. A huge difference, right? Because this is after-tax money, you guys. To have this amount of after-tax money in the bank, like, we just know based on looking at the finances and financial situation, if you look at all of the studies and research that have been done based on the majority of people that are living in the United States. So everything is mindset, right? When you start to get your own mind wrapped around that, and then you're out and you're in a transaction with an agent. So let's say, by way of example, you have a conversation with an agent and they've been amazing to work with. I would say don't have this conversation with somebody that's not amazing to work with, right? Because you become the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. It's not about getting bodies into the EXP model from an agent attraction perspective. It's about having high-level professionals that, whether they're doing their business in real estate on a part-time basis or they're really building a career around it, it's about being surrounded by those kind of people. So what if each time you have a closing, you said for somebody that would fit that perspective and you've had a great experience working with them as an agent, something like, hey, I just want to acknowledge that it's been really great working with you during this transaction. I appreciate your professionalism and the way that we were able to work together to help our clients meet their needs. And imagine if you're on the receiving end of that conversation, right? And then that would be a compliment that you would give that person. And there's an actual structure to agent attraction and the conversation to have with people. I'm going to teach you that structure. I want to give you a feel for it first. And so it's like, oh my gosh, well, thank you so much, right? And, as such, you seem like somebody that, cares about the industry and being a professional in the industry and wants to stay up to date with what's happening in the industry and where it's going. Would you agree that that's true? And anybody that's a professional is going to say, yes, absolutely. And then the next thing that you could say to someone would be, there's something that's totally disrupting the real estate industry for real estate agents because of what it will mean for not just them, also their clients. And it's in a platform with a company called EXP. Have you heard of it? And whether they say yes or whether they say no doesn't really matter, because then the next question or statement can be, are you open to getting educated so that you stay up to speed with what's happening and where the market is going for realtors, based on what based on what you've already said? And most people are going to say, yeah, I would want to be educated and know about that. So it's not a will you join EXP or I want to recruit you to EXP. It's really about being positioned to be educated for what's happening in the industry that they're a part of, right? And then you might even say, hey, this isn't about you changing companies. This is about you getting educated on what's happening and where things are going. And that is a very easy conversation to have, just as a compliment on the other end of any transaction that you're doing with an agent that you've had a great experience with. So There's so much to this, it will take longer than 2 hours, but there's some principles that go through it. And the principles are that when you connect or take the time to connect with someone as a person, that's where the magic happens. Because there's this corny little saying, people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. You guys heard that? It's like, oh, that's so cheesy. And then it's so true. Okay, so how many of you feel kind of pressure to say the right thing or have to know exactly what to say to someone to effectively attract other agents? Like, oh, I just knew what to say, or if I had the, you know, whatever, right? Because based on results, if you're having conversations and you're not having agents that are joining EXP, there's a breakdown. So what we're going to do today is we're going to demystify that. And before we do, though, I'm going to just show the power so you can start to get in your mind. Actually, you know what? We're going to save that. But you know it's coming. So why you feel that challenge is because you feel the pressure to be able to deliver the value of EXP, show someone why it's going to be great for them such that they make a decision to come over. And that's really not your job, because there's tools that will do that for you in a much more effective way. So if you're out like attempting to have those conversations, I'm going to say it's not the most effective use of your time, and you're not going to get the results that are possible if you follow a really simple system. So the simple system is around inviting. There's a difference between inviting someone to look at what EXP has to offer and actually presenting it to them and recruiting them into doing it. And because most people aren't comfortable with recruiting unless they've done a lot of it and have developed a skill set around it, when you can make something systematized and really simple that anyone can go out there and do, now you have people that understand the value proposition of what it looks like to be doing what they're already doing, which is selling real estate, just choosing to do it with this company and the benefits that go with it, and the way to be with people, and 4 really simple things to check in on to become masterful at inviting. So it's the attraction piece that actually brings people to the table. So number 1 of that is to create curiosity. Actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to skip the order. We're going to go number 1 is the compliment. So there's a couple of things about a compliment that are important. Be brief, be brilliant, be gone is what I like as far as compliments, because if you have something simple that rings true, that has been your experience of that person, and you tell that person, it's powerful. For example, I just met Nikki for the first time today, and so an example of what a compliment that would look like to Nikki is, Nikki, you know what I really appreciated about you is that you were here early, you were ready to go, and you have a very energetic and enthusiastic energy about you. Right? So that was my experience of her. And it was short, right? However, if you watch what happened to her face, like her face lit up. She sat up, you know, taller in the chair because she just was acknowledged for how she showed up and my experience of her. So never underestimate the power of a compliment when you're having a conversation with someone. In the context of agent attraction, what is the compliment that you're going to give that person? And it's not the number of homes that they've sold. That's not a compliment. That's performance related. That is not who they are as a human being. So when you're looking at creating deeper connections with people, this could be your clients. I mean, you can use it in any context. The context of the conversation that we're having today is around agent attraction. Is that compliment of being able to find something that's true for you, that's simple, and just 1 or 2 things that you could say to that person as a compliment. Now, most people, are you familiar with the book 5 Love Languages? Okay. So if you guys have read that, you know that words of affirmation is a love language, and some people know about that, some people don't, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if words of acknowledgement are one of your love languages or not. There's something physiologically that happens when you compliment someone, and that is that resistance drops. So we're all walking around in our lives doing different things that we have resistance on. Maybe it's getting ready for a listing and we're filling in for someone else because they dropped the ball. And so we've got, resistance to that. Like, we're gonna do it because it's gonna get the end result that we want. However, it's like, gosh, I'm feeling resistance about it right now. It could be any activity that you're doing. If you're doing things that are not in your highest values or things that you don't wanna be doing at that point in time and you're doing them anyway, and you have a conversation with someone, now to think about this in the context of agent attraction, agents running around, networking groups, attempting to do whatever they're doing to grow their businesses, actually in transactions doing the business. There's a lot of that kind of energy that just goes on naturally for an agent. So if you take the time to simply give somebody a compliment, it's disruptive to whatever that track is that they're running on in their life or in their day or in that moment. Who knows what's going on in their family. What you've also done is you've invested in that relationship, right? And maybe I don't have a relationship with Nikki because I've not even known her for 2 hours. However, based on me acknowledging her for what my experience of her has been so far, I just made an investment into that relationship. And everything about agent attraction has to do with relationships and strengthening relationships. So getting really great at acknowledging people in however you're going to choose to do it. It needs to be true, it needs to be in your language, and the shorter that it is and does not involve a big long story, the more they're going to hear and be able to receive that message. So that's the first step. The second step is to create curiosity. So I'm going to give you an example of Rick. There is a gal that showed up on our Facebook news feed that was at our house like 5 years ago, no longer than that. It's been 7 years ago because we were in a different house. So she was a friend of a friend, and there was this group of gals that came over. She was one of them. I literally have not seen her or talked to her since that period in time. However, I was on Facebook and she popped up in my news feed for some reason, and she's clearly a realtor now. She wasn't a realtor back then. And she lives in Southern California, and so I said to Rick, I'm like, hey, remember Wally? And and he goes, yeah, I remember her. And I said, well, she's selling real estate. He's like, she is? I'm like, yeah, you should reach out to her. So, Rick's great. He's been recruiting for a long, long time. And he's not afraid to talk to people. I mean, you don't succeed as a realtor being afraid to talk to people. So he has a call set up with her. He just happened to do it from home, and I just happened to be there. And you may have noticed, for those of you that have been around us, and for those of you that maybe haven't been around us individually, we have very different styles of doing things, right? So I'm like, I know I cannot be in the room and like leave him alone to have this conversation. However, we'd be listening to hanging on every word so we could talk about it afterwards, right? And he knows this because he's married to me. He hates it, which is why he doesn't work from home very much. So, I won't say that, I won't speak for him. Anyway, so he has the conversation. It's like a half-hour conversation. Now, mind you, they haven't spoken in like 7 years. And I'm walking around doing stuff. I'm like working from the other room, and I can hear the whole thing. And I was like, oh, that was an opportunity. That was an opportunity. In an attraction space, not in a salesy, pushy space, to open up this conversation. And he finished up the call, and I'm like, okay. We've been together 12 years, and I know enough as a wife to go, don't say a word. So I'm like, I'm not going to say a word, right? And I'm going to let him bring it up if he wants to bring it up. However, the call started and the call stopped, and there was like nothing about what he's doing. And so I didn't walk into the room as soon as the call was done because I didn't want him to think that I had been listening and hanging on every word to see how the call went. I mean, you can imagine this whole picture happening in our house, right? So about 10 minutes later, I walk in the room, and he's like, and I didn't say anything, and he just was like, oh, that call did not go the way that I wanted it to go. I was like, oh, tell me about that. Like, why? What happened? And he's like, well, I didn't say anything to her about, EXP. And I was like, okay. Well, what was going on? And he's like, well, I just felt like I hadn't talked to her in 7 years, and so it was, just a little awkward to bring that up, and I'm talking about you telling a story. I'm glad you're reconnecting. Oh. It's the lolly story.
It's the what?
Lolly story.
Oh, crap.
And so, it was like, okay. So the first reason I'm telling you guys this story is because for somebody that's been recruiting for as many years as he has, it's not like you just end up one day and it's effortless, right? However, there are things about it that when you systematize and you put into a system, you don't have to think about it every time you have a conversation, because if you're thinking about the perfect thing to say and the perfect way to say it every time you go to have one of those conversations, you'll drive yourself crazy and it's gonna take so much of your mental space and energy. So at the end of, him sharing what his experience was, and I said, well, did you share your story? And he's like, well, what do you mean did I share my story? I'm like, why you're at EXP and where you're going. You didn't even have to say like EXP, did you just share your story? And he's like, well, no, I didn't, right? And that's what you'll find when most people out there talking to EXP. When they talk to other agents, they're gonna be talking about like, oh, did you know they have rev share, and you can have stock, and there's retirement, da da da. Simon Sinek held a Great Leaders Inspire Action, the little YouTube video that's 18 minutes long, talks about starting with why. People that start with what they're doing and how they're doing it is what everyone else does. People that actually influence people and move people start with why. So we took some time and we went back and forth to like just package up, what his story is. And now imagine, I'm going to tell you what his story is. Imagine revisiting that same conversation with someone that he hasn't spoken with in the last 7 years in the context of creating curiosity, because he's super connected to telling his own personal story. So obviously if you haven't talked to someone in a while and they say, hey, what's new with you? This is a perfect time to share like a story. So his story is, quite simply this. I've gotten really clear that he's gotten really clear that in his highest values, it's spending time and having great experiences with his sons and his wife. And that as a real estate professional, his vision is different than it's ever been in the 40 years that he's been in the industry. And then he tells a story of his uncles that have both passed away recently, or fairly recently. One that was after an open house that didn't get found until the Monday. He died at his desk. And the other one, in that same way. He's telling the story, and now, like, imagine, like, you are in the story, right? Like, where is he going with this? This is all part of creating curiosity. And so the next part of his story is that he's taken a new direction or a different direction over the last few years with his real estate career, because what he's really clear on is that his purpose is to link arms with real estate professionals and help them thrive in the industry where they're not going to need to worry about being in a situation like his uncles were, and be able to have a really healthy balance between family and work life where they're not constantly worried about when their next closing is going to be or how that's going to happen. Or for somebody that owns an office, if he's talking to somebody doing that, what the office is doing to stay profitable and keep its doors open, because he has that experience as well. Imagine you're on the other end of that conversation, like what is, your next question is, oh my gosh, what are you doing, right? So the create curiosity part of inviting is, again, it's about you connecting with, what is your story? And this is like, we could spend 6 hours on getting clear on that and packaging it up. However, that piece for you is to look inside and go like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you can connect this to not being numbers, to actually translating what it's going to mean for you in your life, most of that, for most people, comes down to peace of mind once they get the boxes checked for things that they want to do, have, or experience, right? Most of that's going to come down to financial peace of mind, which is a thing that most people don't have, right? Where literally, like, if you can live your life and you don't have to think about money, are you, like, your time, what you're doing every day, how much of what you do every day is related to the generation of income? And what if that time now, where would it go if you could put it somewhere else? So when you start to think about for yourself, like your own personal why, your own personal story, now you're just having conversations with people about real stuff. And you don't have to pour your heart out for 10 hours to do it. It can be, 2 to 3 minutes. It's being willing to share that real place for you and where you're at, with the purpose of creating curiosity. If you've done these first 2 steps really well, everything else will take care of itself, because you're going to have people wanting to talk to you about how you're doing that. You've got them with the why. The next is like, what are you doing and how are you doing it? That's where the EXP conversation comes into play, okay? So this next part is